Howdy, folks. I trust you're enjoying my hiatus just as much as I am. But as promised, I'm here to dangle a little bait. Just enough to keep the fish biting. And tonight, we have a doozy on the hook. This following episode was wildly popular when it was released late last year over on Patreon. So without further ado, an unlocked Monsters Among Us Beyond episode, just for you. And as a quick reminder, I'll be back with Season 13 on March 10th. Enjoy. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us Beyond, number 50. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Hello folks and welcome back to another Beyond episode. It's a pleasure to have you here with us this evening. And tonight we're going to circle back to this rewind series. And tonight's guest is special indeed. Now as a podcaster myself, I don't often get the chance to listen to many other shows. But on that rare occasion, I have a short list I go to. And one of the men behind one of those podcasts is joining me this evening. Well, you might know our next guest from television shows such as True Blood, Hot in Cleveland, and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but you likely know him as one of the hosts of the podcast Bigfoot Collectors Club. Joining us on this evening's Rewind is Michael Mcmillian. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Well, hello, Derek. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Ooh, I'm on the Patreon. Ooh.
Yeah, you're on the. Well, you guys, you're the other side, and ours is Beyond. So we kind of have the same idea going on here.
There you go. And then, somehow those two realms meet over here, I guess.
It's like a melding of universes, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like, the old, if you ever read Wizard of Oz, how you'd look at the old maps and there'd be like, there's Gillikin country, there's Munchkin country, and they all touch. So you're beyond, we're the other side.
It sounds terrifying, I'll be honest. That
movie
gives me the creeps.
Oh, yeah.
I'm one of those people. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the folklore of it or just the imagery, but that movie creeps me out.
Well, then certainly you're creeped out by Return to Oz, because Return to Oz is the scariest movie of all time.
I haven't even seen it. Probably for that reason, yeah.
There's like a headless witch, and then there's the Wheelers, who are like these weird patchwork punk rock dudes with weird masks and just wheels on their legs and arms, and it's very scary.
This sounds like our future, actually. Masks, wheels everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
This is December, I think you're talking about, right?
Yes. It's Wheeler December 2021. Get ready, everybody.
Everybody, hang on to your hats. Well, Michael, if you don't mind, for those of us that don't know, I know who you are, but I guess some of my listeners don't. Could you tell us how you got into the paranormal? What was kind of your catalyst to kind of delve into all this crazy crap?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I'm an actor and occasional writer, and we've been doing the podcast, Bryce Johnson and I, who's a fellow actor, and our on-mic producer, Riley Bray. We've been doing Bigfoot Collectors Club for almost 4 years now. But I was into the paranormal long before then. I was one of those kids, probably like most people listening, that gravitated towards the weird section of their public school library. I would check out all the books on UFOs and ghosts and Bigfoot and cryptids. The Daniel Cohen's book on cryptozoology was like one of my favorite. I guess it covered other things too, but like he was one of the early authors that I remember reading in elementary school, and those leaving lasting impressions. There always seemed to be something around the house growing up. I had an older sister who liked Bigfoot, and so she would tell me stories, and there was always I'm sure we had books with like the Loch Ness Monster in them and everything. So I was just always, I don't know. I think I'm wired this way just naturally. I've always had a big imagination. I've been into comic books and fantasy and sci-fi. And so I've always gravitated towards the paranormal and the unexplained. Big X-Files fan growing up. Watched exclusively the unsolved mysteries that involved aliens. I didn't care about the true crime stuff. Spent sleepless nights terrified that alien grays were going to abduct me. So this is really, I was born this way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I wanted to do a podcast and was looking to do something at the time that kind of took me out of the daily, rigmarole of auditioning and the business, and kind of wanted to do something that was a little bit more left field. Obviously this has changed, I think, a lot in the past 4 years as well, because there are so many paranormal podcasts and stuff. But I wanted to, I talked to Bryce about creating something that would be a more conversational, a little bit more fun, not taking the subject super seriously. I loved Art Bell and Coast to Coast.
Sure, yeah.
I started to lose touch with Coast to Coast in recent years, so I was like, I miss just the let's talk about weird stuff. So that was kind of the goal with Bigfoot Collectors Club. We're in the comedy zone, comedy category in iTunes, but I think that's we're paranormal first, and then I guess comedy second. But I can't believe there's still not like a paranormal banner in
I couldn't agree more.
I was crazy.
I was reading reviews this morning, which I do on occasion, and I was thinking that same thing. I'm like, why am I stuck in these categories that really don't make any sense for my show whatsoever? Like travel and leisure, I think, is the category I found myself in, which makes no sense. Just give us an unexplained, at the very least an unexplained category that we can kind of lump ourselves into. True crime, and everybody can kind of jump in there.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, so, come on, Apple, get with it.
That's it. So I've just always been into it. And I had some weird experiences in the couple years leading up to the podcast that I think probably pushed it over the edge for me to go, okay, let's talk about this stuff. Because Bryce and I would get together because we've worked together a couple times as actors, and then we'd get together every 6 months and have lunch and complain about auditioning, and then always our conversation would gravitate towards the unexplained, and I was just like, this should be the show. Let's just do this. Let's talk about this stuff.
Well, you guys have certainly captured lightning in a bottle. There's just something about the show that's wildly entertaining. You guys are both entertainers, so you don't do what I'm doing right now. You stumble along and try to think what you got everything ready. You're ready to go.
Trust me, we do stumble along a lot.
It doesn't come off. It sounds seamless. It sounds great, and of course, Riley's a big
component to that.
I guess. Yeah. To the show
Riley
as well.
brings this whole level of Riley's comes from a music background, also into this stuff, and about 20, 30 episodes in, we were like, why isn't Riley composing music for the stories of high strangeness that we share on the show? And so that became a thing. We first started doing it. He would just do it live, sort of like talk show band style. And we really are a talk show because we also bring in, actors and writers and comedians to share their own experiences. But we've been mixing it up, especially during the pandemic. We've been doing more deep dives with just the three of us, so it's not always guest heavy, but it's a chat show. So in the second half, we always do a story of high strangeness, and Riley's been composing those. And then as we've been sequestered during the pandemic, Riley's really turned these in. He's gone from just doing notes on a soundboard that sounded really cool and ethereal to doing almost full on John Carpenter level scores.
It's got to be nice to have him in your pocket like that, right?
It's great,
Anything you say is instantly more creepy and more dramatic the second he hits those keys, I imagine.
Yeah, it's tough too. He keeps setting the bar higher and higher for himself. Then he'll be like, we'll get in a jam some week where we got to turn an episode around really quickly, and he'll be like, dude, I don't know. I don't have it. I was just like, hey man, just don't worry about it. Whatever you put out is going to be great. So don't stress. You're pushing yourself further and further to meet this, level of quality that's hard. Some weeks you're just not going to be able to write a full Hans Zimmer, background to this. So don't worry about it.
It's nice to strive for that, though. I think that certainly brings out the best work in anybody. If they're willing to push themselves, they're going to find something in there that they didn't even know existed, I guess.
Totally.
Well, we could sit here and bullshit all day long, but let's get into some of these stories, Michael.
Cool, let's do it.
I've got some lined up here that are kind of in line with your life, if that makes any sense. And not to sound like too much of a creeper, but I went online and looked up a few things about where you were from and what you've been doing. And we're going to kind of follow that path a little bit with some of these stories. So we're going to kick off this evening with somebody named Michael, ironically, in the state of Kansas. Now, Kansas is where you're from, is that correct? Hopefully
that's correct. I grew up on the eastern side of Kansas City, Kansas, 10 minutes from the Missouri border. So I was dipping my toes in Kansas City, Missouri, almost weekly. It's all just one big greater metropolitan area. It's confusing. But so I grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City, Kansas, in an area called Olathe, which is really weird, really near Overland Park. These are for very few specific listeners who will enjoy hearing
both of them that are
names.
there listening from Kansas right now. I'll save all the questions until after the story, so let's just go ahead and jump into this real quick. Again, This is Michael from Kansas, and this was originally featured on Season 10, Episode 15.
Hi, my name's Michael Brown. I'm from Salina, Kansas. I have a story that happened with me and 5 other buddies. It happened right outside of Salina, Kansas, in a little town called Tesket, Kansas. It was off Shipton Road, and it's this location called Hot's House. It's an old house. Hot's, Hotz, is the name, I believe, the last name of the person that used to own it, probably in the late 1800s. The house had been known to have a lot of haunting experiences, known midgets jumping on people's backs in the basement and whatnot. But our experience was there was 6 of us guys in a Honda Civic driving out to the house off of I-70, one of the main highways that runs through Kansas. It was probably about 1 a.m. when we're driving out there, and his house is in the middle of nowhere. And we get off the main exit off of I-70, the exit towards Tesket, Kansas, and we turn on Shipton Road, which is the road that leads you out to the house. The house is still out there to this day, but it had a fire, so there's only the limestone left of the house. So we turn on the road, and we are heading out to the house. It's 6 of us in a little Honda car, so there's 4 guys in the back and 2 in the front. When we pull up to the house, there's a bunch of trees surrounding the house, and you can't really see the house. It's probably about a quarter mile from the dirt road. So we pull in front of the house, park the car on the side of the road, hoping that nobody drives by and, gets us in trouble for going up to the house. And the man that owns the property, that used to own the property, would come out with a shotgun if you ever saw anybody out there. Lots of satanic practices, etc., that were done out there. So we get out of the cars. All we have is our little cell phone lights. This probably happened 15 years ago, I would say. So cell phone lights weren't as bright as they are now. And we had a spotlight that you had to plug into the cigarette lighter, but we couldn't bring it with us. So we're exiting the car. We have to crawl through barbed wire to get to the house. Once we get out of the car, we hear a hissing noise, but there's no power, there's no propane or anything at this location. It's completely from probably mid to late 1800s. There's also a limestone tunnel that some believe that there was a slave tunnel that was an escape tunnel back in the days, but I think it's something more evil than that. But it's a natural limestone cave that's under the basement that I've previously been out to the house during the day and have been able to jump down into it. And it's usually full with water. Who knows how far it goes, though. But anyhow, we are starting to walk up to the house. There's cow pies, chunks of barbed wire all over up to the house, so it's hard to really get a quick entrance or exit from the house. And we, again, hear this hissing noise the whole time consistently as we're walking up to the house. It gets louder and louder as we get closer and closer. None of us understand what the noise could be, but as we get closer, it gets louder. So the front entrance to the house, you could see the 2 basement windows, and then there's the main level that's probably 3 or 4 feet off the level of the ground. So there's a cement stairway to the right of the house that you have to walk up and go left into the house. So we're getting up to the cement pillar, and if I was to stand in the basement, I'm at about 6'2". If I was to stand in the basement and look out the window, it would go up to about my upper chest. So you could see the upper chest from that part of my body. As one of us two of us are on the cement platform in front of the house. A couple of us are about to walk in. Someone yells they see something go from one window to the other window in the basement. So it freaks us out. And this whole time it's a noise. Again, sounding almost like a propane being released, getting louder and louder. We can barely hear each other talk at this point. So at this point, we kind of get freaked out. We have golf clubs and baseball bats, et cetera, just in case there might be some drugged out people or et cetera that might be out there. So we start walking backwards, kind of holding on to each other. I remember my brother was with me, and he was kind of holding on to the side of my shirt. We're probably from 18 to 22, maybe age-wise. I'm 34 now. So we start to leave the house, walk back towards the road, get to the dirt road, get the spotlight. We shine the spotlight onto the house, and then a couple of us see a long, white-haired figure crawl out of the basement window onto the cement platform and kind of sit with your knees up and your legs between your knees, kind of almost like a lion might sit or something on the front cement pillar. So at this point, again, it's about a quarter mile from the road, and we have a spotlight through all these trees, so it's a little hard to see what exactly it is, but we could see two glaring eyes from the light and long white, like Gandalf-style hair, and it looked real lengthy. And we all saw this creature, person, thing, whatever it might have been. We're all trying to make sense of it as we see it. All of us are athletic built, you know, I wouldn't say super tough guys, but somewhat. And all of us got a really bad feeling and decided not to go venture and see what this thing was that we saw come out of the basement window onto the cement platform, just kind of looking at us. So we decide to leave. We get in the car and we're heading back, and we're probably, I think Tesket's probably 20 miles from our hometown, Salina, Kansas. And we are heading back on the highway, and we get off the dirt road, off of Shipton Road, getting back onto I-70, and we get about a mile onto I-70, and something hits the front of the car. It's probably 2 in the morning. There's not many. There's only a couple semis on the highway, not many cars at all. So we're thinking maybe an animal. And we all felt the hit in the car. Again, we're packed in this car, 4 guys in the back, 2 in the front. So we really felt something hit the front right of the car. So we turn around and we're trying to see where this animal might have been, because we're already freaked out from seeing this creature, whatever it was, at Hot's house. So we turn around to try to see the animal we hit. And about a mile or maybe a half a mile past that same point, roughly where that first time we got hit was, something hit the front of the car again, the right side, shredded the front tire, but then it popped the tire, just the tread came off. So we're all freaked out, as you can imagine at this point. We pull over the side of the highway. Again, at that point, no semis or any cars passed us on a high trafficated highway, because I'm guessing because it was 2 in the morning. We get out and we see brown gunk all over the front right of the car, which could have been came from the tire, but it was a solid gunk once we touched it. It wasn't like guts or any kind of pieces of animal or anything like that. So we're out there, you know, thinking Jeepers Creepers or something equivalent to that kind of thought. And again, it didn't pop the tire, it just took off the tread. We didn't have a spare tire. We'll probably be another 10 or 15 miles or have to drive back into town on this tire. We look out in the field, look around, listen for noises, don't hear anything at that point. So we slowly drive back 40 miles an hour on a 75-mile-an-hour highway, get to a gas station, and all just quietly kind of went our own ways at that point. And to this day, we have no idea what it was. But my boys and I really enjoy your stories, and thanks for the time. Hope to hear a story on the show. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing that story with us. And you, Michael, tell me what you think of this. Now, when you think of Kansas, you don't immediately think of the paranormal. I could think of maybe the Sally House, maybe a couple other things here or there. But as far as this story is concerned, you know, they're legend tripping. They seem to have found something. Is this typical for a night in Kansas, or is this something odd?
This was fun. This is a really great story to listen to, because we would do what I now know is called legend tripping when I was in high school. We weren't as far out west as Salina, so, you know, but we could get to rural areas pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. There was an area near where I grew up called Stoll, which was about Cemetery. 40 minutes from me. Yeah, the cemetery in Stoll was a super creepy one, because that was supposed to be one of the gateways to hell, and there was a legend that the devil had walked in the chapel's graveyard there, and the graveyard's still there. The chapel is no longer there, I think. but used to be able to go down there and there'd be like beer cans and spray painting, and it was also
somebody's
like
underwear. There's always somebody's underwear.
Somebody's underwear is there. And also like I grew up in the I was a kid in the 80s and early 90s, and we were still piggybacking on Satanic Panic back then. There was an area really close to where I grew up called Baines Crossing, because where I lived, it was suburban, but it was the house I grew up in was considered, even though I was in a neighborhood, it was considered the sticks at the time, because we were kind of one of the neighborhoods that was the furthest south. And then once you went south of us, it was a lot of like ranches and farms, not farms, but just like pastures and, woods. I grew up in a really bucolic little neighborhood with, a creek running through and woods next to me. So it was really, really easy to access spooky stuff in my mind. There was like an old farmhouse in the woods, the foundation of an old farmhouse next to me. So I always felt like, an alien could land in the field behind my house, or there's ghosts around. But Stoll was one of them, and then this other one, Baines Crossing, which was rumored to be a place where Satan worshipers would get together and sacrifice animals. So people would always go down there and try to find animal bones and weird stuff. And I think usually you would just find stuff that other teenagers had gone down there to look for stuff, and left shit. But yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, Kansas is a really spooky place, big wide open skies, long stretches of nothing. I-70 where Michael was talking about. If you've ever driven between, Kansas and the West Coast, that is the worst part. It is rough.
It's rough.
The Garden of Eden is out near that area, which is really cool. This artist, I can't remember his name at the top of my head, but he was like around the turn of the century. He built this, like, all these cement statues and gardens and sculptures, and then he buried himself in a mausoleum there with a glass coffin top where you can, like, go and look at his body, and he's still, like, preserved there.
That's one way to go out, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Kansas is, like, especially back in the day, like back in the early 20th century, Kansas, we think of Kansas as being very conservative now, but it was like a real leftist, radical place, and a lot of like weirdos lived out there, a lot of artistic people. And yeah, so this doesn't surprise me that he would stumble upon an old creepy house out in the middle of nowhere off of I-70 and see something strange. That really rings a bell with me.
Have you ever heard of what they ran into? I guess you could describe it maybe as one of these pale walkers that people seem to be talking about.
Yeah, what's up?
Are you familiar with those at all, I guess?
I'm not really familiar with a pale walker, no. I'm
not. Well, from the calls that I've been receiving, and I've probably maybe close to a dozen over the past couple of years, it's this humanoid creature that's seen. Typically, it's like Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, but I guess I've received reports all the way down to like Missouri and those areas. But it's like a 6 foot tall humanoid, pale skin, no hair, and they're just creeping around. I don't know what they're doing out there. I don't know.
So
where they're
like a tall golem.
Like a tall, yeah. That's a good way to describe it, actually. Yeah, just a creepy little hairless guy.
So they
skinny,
kind of,
gaunt.
that kind of fits a little bit of like Skinwalker or Wendigo kind of
the
vibes.
Rake.
The Rake.
Yeah,
yes,
there's some other ones that people have associated with this.
So this. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it seems like the Rake is obviously a creepypasta, but maybe this is something that inspired that creepypasta or something along those lines.
It is true, but I have to say, listening to this, it is also like very possible that this is a really emaciated hermit living out in the middle of nowhere, because that's. But and at that point, what's the difference between a rake and just a man who's like living completely off the grid in the basement of an old creepy house? So it's hard to tell. So I would never rule that out, especially with the long white Gandalfian hair. It's like, I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is just a guy who really wants to be left alone, and maybe the hitting something with the car is just a coincidence.
Sure.
All said and done, though, a very successful legend tripping, and
no kidding.
Who knows what's really going on there? And I would be total creeped out. This also gave me like Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes as well.
Of course.
It's don't go into that house. You don't need to get any closer to that. Just stay out of there.
On my show, I do my best to, if I hear something I think I hate the word debunk, but explain away, I usually try to do so. And in this case, I can't help but think that maybe they saw an owl. There are barn owls that live in Kansas that are tall white birds that, if you see the right angle, I guess it could look like hair. It could be a white figure walking back and forth. It could be something as simple as that.
Like a crane or something down there. I know now people are booing us.
I know, but to me, if you can dismiss one of these logical theories, then that just makes the story much more scary. If I say, it's an owl, and then you come back and say, well, it can't be an owl because of this, or this, I'm like, well, wait a minute, this just got a little spookier because this whole time I thought it was an owl.
I guess when it comes to humanoids like that, where they're pale and they can look closely human, I tend to go, okay, well, I would want to rule out hermit first. I would want to rule out human first, and then let's get into that. So I think there's just as good a chance, if not more, that this was some creepy old-timer living in the basement, which to me is just as creepy.
Just as creepy.
You know what I mean?
Even more creepy because it's valid. It's there. I mean, the guy exists.
And there's some timelessness to that, right? It's like this guy this guy could have been around in medieval times or now. It's always there's something archetypal about that. The human living on the fringes of society, on the threshold of wilderness and society. Yeah. I find that just as fascinating as a Sasquatch in many, many ways,
And the thing I can't help but think of is put yourself in the hermit's shoes. He's there 2, 3 in the morning at his house or his home, whatever he's made out of this place, and suddenly a car full of teenage kids shows up. That's got to be terrifying on his angle, too, if this is a hermit in there.
Yeah, or he loves to freak them out.
Yeah,
so
that's
he's
his favorite thing. Showtime.
Let me strip down. Let's go perch like a lion on this rock and freak these kids out. That's what I would do. Honestly, if I was an old hermit, I'd be like, let's give them a thrill.
That sounds like a great time, actually. It's a good way to pass the evening. Well, I enjoyed that story, and it's actually hard for me to find some stories out of Kansas, so this is one of the better ones, and I was happy that Michael called it in.
There's a lot of ghost stories, Western ghost stories. You get down into Dodge City, which is in Southwest Kansas. You can find some cool stuff. There's also, it's not as widely popular, but there are some UFO abduction stories out in Western Kansas. We did one recently. We were covering the summer, all summer long. We've been doing Wet Hot Alien Summer too.
I have my T-shirt. So.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. So we just recently covered the stories on the Michelin UFO knots. Yes. And these are entities that are, for lack of a better description, described as looking like the Michelin Man. I think they're probably some kind of suit or astronaut suit, but ribbed like the Michelin Man. And there was a couple out in Western Kansas who were abducted. This is in the 70s, I think in 1976. And their abductors were those Michelin Man type entities. They had sort of a typical Betty and Barty Hill, they were poked and prodded and sent back down, and drew pictures of these weird. They almost look like a cross between alien greys and a Michelin Man. But I know that was out in Western Kansas as well. And then close to us on the Missouri side, there's not too far from us, there's the Joplin, Missouri Spook Lights.
Oh, yes.
So there's orbs that people go and park their car and watch. And then there's something near us, about a half hour where I grew up, there's a creature called a Ridge Runner.
I'm not familiar with this, but you got to tell me about it. I love that name.
It's a small local legend. This is one my buddy Dave told me about a couple years ago, but there are reports of a cat or wolf-like creature that will run alongside the road or run up against your car and scrape your car. It's very Lizard Man of Scape or Swamp style. And it's been called the Ridge Runner. So we have our little local... we got our local cryptids and UFO stories. I
love that name, Ridge Runner.
It's cool.
It's clever,
right?
It's a clever name.
It should be like a great high school mascot.
Yeah, no kidding, right? The East Wichita Ridge Runners or something like that. Yeah,
with like a werecat. That'd be cool.
Well, let's move on to our next story. I heard a rumor that you like UFOs. And, as you said, Wet Hot Alien Summer is in full swing right now. So I dug this call up from an anonymous source out of Arkansas. Now, this call originally aired on Season 2 all the way back in the 5th episode of that season. So this is that anonymously submitted story.
Hey, I've got a story coming from when I was stationed at Little Rock Air Force Base, Arkansas. That's in the city of Jacksonville, about 20 minutes east of Little Rock, which is Arkansas state capital. So I worked graveyard, working with the C-130s, the cargo planes that they got over there, flying training missions. And I worked the grave shift for about 3 years. It was about 6 a.m. on a cold winter morning. It was actually around February when this happened, February of 2014. It was around 6 a.m. We were preparing the planes to fly off, do their missions. There were about 8 of us, and we were on graveyard shift. Well, around 6 a.m., we were getting ready for shift change, but to avoid that noise, we go out onto the flight line, drive out there with our bread truck, stand in front of the jet, make sure it's ready for takeoff, all that stuff. But usually it doesn't take too many people, so for the most part, there's like 6 of us out in front of the plane, just kind of talking, hanging out, getting ready to get off work. And at about 6 a.m., the sun's rising, and it just creates this beautiful glow across the sky, this beautiful red haze mixing with a blue night sky. And it's just this beautiful light show in the morning for about 30 minutes. One of my coworkers looks up and goes, "Hey, what's that?" We all kind of looked up, and we saw this rocket-looking thing shooting across the sky. Well, I say rocket because it looked silver. It was like a silver metallic-looking object. It was reflecting the light of the sun off of it. It looked like it was kind of shimmering, which is what made us identify it as a rocket. And it had like a fire coming out of the back end of it, like it was being propelled forward. We concluded it wasn't like some space rock or something, or some space dust, because firstly, it was way too low. We see planes flying all the time in the sky, so for the most part, we really know how high a plane normally is, and an altitude for reference. So for reference, when we actually saw how high this thing was, it wasn't terribly high, like where a comet would be so far away in the distant sky. It was definitely within our sight to where we were able to identify that it was some object. I'm not going to say UFO. I don't know, because we don't know what it is. But we were all looking at this for about a solid 4 or 5 seconds, and before we knew it, it just kind of evaporated. Like if you blinked, this thing was gone. So for 5 seconds, we're observing it, and with all of us looking at it, eyes wide open, we're just like, "What is that?" And before we knew it, it just disappears. Like it vanishes into thin air. Like you look at somebody, you turn around, and they sprint off, and they're gone. You'd have no idea where they went. It was definitely baffling. 8 of us, Air Force guys, Air Force mechanics, standing there wondering what this was, and there are no jets in the vicinity of Little Rock, so we concluded it wasn't a jet. And for the most part, if it was some type of jet fighter, you would hear the engine, you'd hear the sound of the motor, you'd hear all of that, you'd hear the boom it would make as it flew over you, as the sound of the jet tries to catch up to the jet itself, because jets actually fly faster than the sound they make. It didn't make any sound at all, but it had this fire that was coming out of it, and it was a metallic-looking thing that was bouncing the light of the sun off of its skin. And to this day, we have no idea what it was. And that happened at Little Rock Air Force Base in 2014 in a cold winter morning.
Thank you, caller, for sharing that. Well, Michael, I did a little bit of research on this. At first, I thought, they were doing some SpaceX launches from Texas, right?
Right.
So I thought, well, clearly the guy just saw this. But then I started doing the math. This sighting took place in 2014, and the very first launch down in Texas with SpaceX wasn't until, let me check my notes, it was April of 2019. So
wow.
There's a good 5-year difference here that tells us that might not be the case. What do you think of the call overall? Do you have any initial thoughts, or what comes to mind?
The first thing that jumped out at me, and I say this with all due respect for someone who's serving in the Air Force, I did enjoy that they said, I don't want to call it a UFO. And it's like, no, that's what it was. It was an unidentified flying object.
By definition, yeah.
Yeah, by definition, it was a UFO. Doesn't mean it was aliens, but it was a UFO. But that's just funny how, like, synonymous, like, you know, now when we say UFO, people think aliens, when it's really just like, guys, remember, you know, not all, what is it? All squares are a rectangle, but rectangles aren't a square. So,
all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon, I think is another good example.
But all bourbon is delicious.
That's true as well.
So this reminded me of the ghost rocket stories that were happening in Europe, like right before the flying saucer wave and craze hit in 1947. So like
I'm not familiar with these. You're going to have to elaborate a bit, I think.
Well, so in between World War II and then 1947 out here in LA. So 1947 saw a huge flap of... We had basically two big flaps in the late 40s and early 50s. We had the 1947 wave, and then we had the 1952 wave. And 1947 is, you know, within just a few short weeks, we had the Kenneth Arnold sighting when he saw the 9 chevron-shaped UFOs flying over Mount Rainier. And then that story, as he says, he described them as flying as if they were saucers skipping over water, and then that was truncated to flying saucer. So that's where we got that term.
Yeah.
Then we had the, what's the name of it? It's the something harbor incident.
Shag Harbor?
Yeah.
Yeah, Shag Harbor. Nova Scotia, I believe. Or it was on, I think it was on the other side. Wasn't it up near Vancouver Island, I think? Am I thinking of the same? This is the one where, like, the guy and his son... claimed to be in a boat, and donut-shaped UFOs hovered over them and dropped a bunch of metal debris. I think we're talking about two different cases. Man, I can't think of the one you're thinking of that did take place in just outside of Seattle, I think. But Shag Harbor actually took place in
I don't think we've done Shag
just outside
Harbor.
of Nova Scotia in 1967.
Okay.
Ironically, I just watched a report on this like yesterday, I think. And they did some missions to try to find the crashed craft at the bottom of the ocean. But what they think happened is it actually submerged and then just took off. Whereas what you're talking about actually dumped molten lava down, killed a dog, I believe. Part of that story.
Exactly. That's my least favorite part. I'm talking about the Maury Island UFO.
That's right, Maury Island. Yeah.
So apologies, everybody. So that was one where Ray Palmer from Fate magazine and Kenneth Arnold, because this happened like within a week of him doing press, went up to investigate it. Seems like there might have been a weird hoax, but they also met these like government men who then mysteriously died in a plane crash after they met with them. Also has some early MIB stuff. And then we have almost the next week we have the Roswell incident. So that's all 1947.
It's a busy week.
Busy couple weeks in June and July of 1947. But I really went off on a digression there, because in between like World War I or World War II and 1947, there was like in Europe, I think in Sweden and in France, they were seeing what they called ghost rockets, which were more like they were UFOs that seemed very rocket-like, like the way that this guy is describing, with the fire shooting out of it at the end, and nobody knew what they were. They were just, people thought that maybe they were newly burgeoning world superpowers testing weapons, but they had unexplained behavior, kind of like this thing. So that's what it made me think of when I heard that. I was like, oh, this is like an old school ghost rocket that you heard about in the 40s.
Weirdly enough, I've never heard of that, but another cool name, ghost rocket. I mean, you immediately know what they're talking about the second they say it. So
yeah, I mean, that was a great game between the East Wichita Ridge Runners and the North Wichita Ghost Rockets.
And there you go. 104 to 105. It was a nail biter.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that these gentlemen were on a military air base when this took place.
Yeah.
They were all in the military. They all saw this thing, acknowledged that it was strange. Like you said, he didn't want to call it a UFO, but that's exactly what it was.
And you can't rule out that maybe this was some sort of secret testing that these guys wouldn't necessarily know about.
Oh, of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I always love it. I think, these Air Force servicemen and women, like, if they're seeing something they don't understand, can't comprehend, like, listen up and take note. You know what I mean? Like, they know what they're talking about. So
I imagine, I've never been in the military myself, but I imagine there's some sort of test they give you or some sort of information they give you about estimating heights and trying to identify craft that you see flying overhead. I think it would be valuable for any soldier to have that information, have that ability. So you would think that these military guys were trained in observation at the very least.
Oh, absolutely. They know what they're talking about. So who knows? I love it, though. That's a classic UFO. Yeah. What is it? We don't know.
It's definitely wild stuff. Well, moving on in your life, there's an old game show that used to do this. Oh man, what was the name of that show?
I think it's This Is Your Life.
This Is Your Life, yeah, that's what it was called. So Michael, This Is Your Life. Eventually, you made your way to Hollywood, right? Did you move out to become an actor? Were you one of the guys that just came out and stumbled into it? Or?
I studied theater in college at a place called Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and then did a showcase of, hey, I can do a monologue and I can do a scene for agents in New York and L.A., and got picked up by an agent out here, so I came straight out to L.A. So yes,
sounds like your path was easier than most.
Yeah, I was very lucky. It doesn't always remain easy, but I had a very very privileged and easy entry into L.A. Yes, so I'm thankful for that.
I moved out here almost 16 years ago to be a writer, and tried my best for 10 years, and took off with my tail between my legs and started a podcast. So
that, you know what? Hey, dude, I started a podcast. Like, it's, you come at it from all angles. Exactly.
Yeah. It's funny how, looking back now, like when I first started the show, I didn't think, well, podcasts aren't even like a real medium. Like nobody listens to these. I mean, it's just something I kind of did for fun, honestly. And now it's kind of evolved to a thing where I couldn't give you numbers, but a certain percentage of people in the car you see driving around are listening to some podcast of some sort. So, there's certainly gained in popularity, and I don't think it's a bad thing for either of us to be involved.
Once moms figured out how to listen to podcasts, it was all off.
Yeah, moms, wine, and true crime. That's all we needed to jumpstart this.
I know. If only we could go back in time.
No kidding, right?
Restart this.
I'm your true crime expert, Derek Hayes.
Yeah.
Well, so anyway, you moved to Hollywood, so let's play a little Hollywood call. Now, this one's about old Hollywood, which I'm sure you are familiar with, having lived there. There's some good stuff back in the old 20s and 30s, in the hills, the lower hills, I guess. Yep. They didn't really even have houses up top at those days.
Well, that's the, without getting too specific, that's the area that I live in. So,
oh, really? Okay. Yeah, don't tell my fans where you live. They'll come find you. So anyway, this is Kate's call. She's actually in Colorado now, but she originally submitted this in Season 4 of Episode 16. Kate, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, Derek. This is Kate from Colorado. I actually grew up in a house that was kind of haunted. It was an old house built in the 20s in Los Angeles. It's in the Hollywood Hills, and it kind of creaked and moaned all the time. And I remember when we first moved in, my mom brought us together, and we were really young, and she just told us, there are ghosts in this house, be nice to them, tell them, if you don't like them, tell them to go away, but always be nice, don't be mean to the ghosts. And we completely freaked out about that and had nightmares, and my parents got in a big fight about it, but I think she was kind of right. We don't really talk about it too much anymore, but there's definitely something in the house. An old woman died in actually my sister and I's bedroom before we moved in. And she died of a heart attack of old age, but she was really lonely. And I guess a few things that happened. One was we had a basement room, and my mom's into I Ching, so there were some iron bells hanging in there. Really, really heavy bells. Like you have to like shake them to get them to move. And I was down there reading, and one day the bell just rang really, really loudly, and nothing else moved. The knob on the bell was moving, but nothing else. It kind of freaked me out, so I went back upstairs where there was more light and got out of there for a little while. Other times, everyone in the house has heard their name called without anyone else being there. I heard my name called really, really loudly one time. I was in the shower, and it sounded like my mom was in danger or in trouble. She was just screaming my name, and I just ran out of the shower as fast as I could and ran downstairs, and my mom's just sitting at the dining room table reading a book. No problem. And she was pretty freaked out, and I was pretty freaked out by it. I've never seen anything, but we have, oh man, things getting knocked over, things kind of moving, like items from the kitchen ending up in bedrooms and bathrooms without really anyone touching them or talking about them. I mean, honestly, it's become really familiar to me, and so now I wouldn't ever want to live in a house that wasn't a little old and had a presence. But yeah, I've got some other stories, but I figured that one might be good. The haunted houses are always kind of my favorite. I think that if you are just kind to the ghost or kind to the spirit and tell them thank you, but you're not really into it right now, or thank you, thanks for being around here, I see you, I hear you, I understand that you're here, they really appreciate that, because I feel like a lot of times they're probably pretty lonely. So, yeah, when I move into a house, I thank the house for letting me be there now. And it's brought pretty good vibes in my life. Anyway, I hope this is usable, and I really love your show, and thank you for doing it. It's great to hear everyone's experiences, and there have been some it's really inspired me. So thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Kate, for sharing the story. So, Michael, are you familiar with any hauntings or anything like this in this area? Like, I've heard you talk about them before. What can you tell us?
I live in this area, and I feel like the hills themselves are haunted. I've had paranormal and unexplained activity. I've been in this building that I'm in for over 10 years now, about 11 years. And I've had weird shit happen here that I can't explain. I've seen orbs float through my bedroom at night.
Self-illuminated or reflecting?
Self-illuminated.
There you go.
Like little bright gold and blue orbs
like
floating
a little
through.
Christmas light just floating.
Yeah,
right?
a little, yep,
Yeah.
coming down through the window, just passing through the walls. I haven't had any ghostly activity here, but as listeners of Bigfoot Collectors Club know, I have had a very strange encounter with an entity outside of my building. We can talk about it in a minute. I don't want to steal thunder from this story, so we can talk about that. But yeah, definitely, I feel like this area was already brimming with activity before anybody settled here, and I think there's some old weird stuff happening here.
Well, it's a super old area. I don't think people realize it, but L.A. was settled by Europeaners in like 1760s. That's pretty old.
It was kind of, so you had San Diego and you had San Francisco, and those were like the big, like fancy port towns and the respectable port towns. And then L.A. was kind of like the Mos Eisley spaceport. It was like where the scum and villainy hung out. It was, I think there was maybe I'm making this up, but I think that there used to be like silver mines around here or something, but it was kind of a shitty port. And it was like if you were a scoundrel, you would hang out here. And it wasn't really until the movie business came out here and people started building, because there was space and it was cheap. You know, it was really the film industry that made Los Angeles a big town. Yeah. But before that, it wasn't the big port town that San Francisco or San Diego were.
And that wasn't until like the late 1890s, right? That film really became a
early
thing.
1900s. Yeah. So this was like a Wild West port town. You know, like if you're playing Red Dead Redemption 2, this would be like the city where all the like smugglers hang out and shoot you if you piss anybody off.
This is where I'd be hanging out, probably. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
these are my people.
I'm also like paraphrasing history that I read like a long time ago. So if I'm wrong about any of that,
as long as it's entertaining, that's half the battle. You know, the other thing that again, I'm just remembering things that I heard too, but. There's a lot of missions that run all the way up the West Coast here, and I'm pretty sure one of them was actually in where downtown is now, and that's sort of why people congregated to that area and sort of built it up. It started as, you know, a religious center.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. And then in the early, like 20s, like 10s and 20s, and maybe into the 30s, I'm not sure about the exact time and date, but like where I live around here, there was a bunch of like new age societies that started up. There was the Crotona Society. It was like a spiritual movement, and they were going to build like the utopian village here, and that fell through, but you can still see like the old walls of where that convent was. And then there's not too far from here the Vedanta Church, which is I think it's got to be, I don't want to say what religion. I think it is based in an Eastern religion. I'm not sure which one. It might be Hindu or Buddhist. It might be its own version of that. I'm not sure, but I know like Aldous Huxley like hung out there and would meditate and then go home and like trip on mescaline and like So there's like this in this area. There's a lot of like new agey stuff, and of course now, not too far down the road from where all of this was is like the big Scientology celebrity center. So there's been all these versions of like new age thinking and newer religions here.
And you missed the Manson family. You missed there's a lot of serial killers that have operated out of that area.
They were up in the valley. They were up in the valley. Okay.
Well, they did a lot of their work down, I guess.
Yeah,
in
they
the
did.
hills.
That's true.
Yeah.
So like it's just a like weird place. LA is a weird town, and
definitely
I also
place.
think that sometimes like spaces like this pop up in weird places where there is already pre-existing strange energy or supernatural energy.
Yeah.
It just makes sense that people would gravitate towards an area where there's like, and then it all just kind of reverberates and feeds in on itself, and it gets spookier and spookier.
Yeah. Well, people keep building on top of existing things as well.
Yep.
I mean, they just keep recycling the land, and you know what happens when you do that a lot. So.
And the other thing that's near me is the Hollywood Tower, which is the haunted Hollywood Tower of Terror from Disney World is based on. And I've met people who lived in that building, and I mean the story is that like oh boy, why am I blanking on his name? It's like the most famous Citizen Kane. Director
Orson Welles.
Yeah, Orson Welles lived up there and had a penthouse apartment, was having a party, and guests were leaving the party, and there was a storm and lightning struck the tower and the elevator broke down and people fell in the elevator and died, and that's basically what the Tower of Terror is recreating. I'm not sure how apocryphal or truthful that story is, but that's the story.
Yeah.
And I've met friends of friends I had lunch with, and this is in the early days of BCC, and they were telling me that they lived in one of those apartments towards the top of the Hollywood Tower. And they were like, we had so much paranormal activity in there. It was nuts. Like disembodied voices.
Wow.
They had activity, poltergeist activity. It was one of those things where like they'd be in the kitchen cleaning up. They'd walk into the bedroom for a couple minutes, come back out, and every cabinet door is open, fridge doors wide open.
Wow.
So that kind of weird stuff happening there. So it's just a haunted place. So this story fits right in there, does not surprise me. And I want to say nothing is scarier to me than hearing your voice be called out by a recognizable voice like your mom, and it's not her. That is the scariest to me.
Any of that mimicry, you hear it with ghosts, sometimes you hear it with UFO stuff, you hear it with Bigfoot even. It's just any of this paranormal stuff seems to have that element to it, and it's creepy as hell.
That trickster shit, I'm not here for it. I do not like
it's
that.
It's unsettling for sure.
Because that means to me that whatever this is like taking notes,
There's a plan in place of some sort.
Yeah. I mean, although like, so my sister has parrots, right? And she's got a Quaker and an Indian ringneck, and they're awesome animals and they're super intelligent. And they mimic, you know what I mean? They like learn phrases, they say it back. They can do like R2-D2 impressions. Nice. They can hum the Game of Thrones theme song. They can't really do it on command, but they do it. And sometimes they do it like if you're petting the dog, they'll go, "Oh, sweet baby, look at the baby." You know what I mean? So they do. There is intelligence behind it.
Some association there.
So I guess it's also just possible that whatever supernatural field is out there can, even if it's not a intelligence in the way that we would personify it, is able to record and play back, learn from human behavior and play it back. So in that way, I guess it's not as scary to me, unless it is like some sort of entity that's like, I'm going to be tricky now and freak you out, you know?
For the sake of sleep, I think a lot of people like to think that it's some sort of natural reoccurrence, that there's a mineral or something that records sound or can record a section of time and it just happens to play it back. When I was a kid, I remember seeing, and this might have been on the television show Sightings, which was on Fox back in the day, but I remember seeing them talking about monks that used to chant in a cave somewhere in Tibet or something. I don't know where it was. But now, 100 years later or whatever, they can go in this cave and still hear the monks chanting because the rock makeup has the same ingredients that Memorex tape had. When they created the tape.
Cool.
I'm going to have to find this and put it on a future show or something like that so that I don't sound like a crazy person. But that's what my memory tells me took place. And they did all these studies to see, what these minerals were, what these elements were that were actually capturing the sound. And it was just reverberating it back into this cave, which I thought was really interesting.
That's wild. I just wanted to circle back and say that Vedanta is a school of Hindu philosophy.
Oh,
so
there we go.
Close.
So all my Hindu listeners are happy now.
I should know this, and I apologize for being ignorant. So there you go.
Hey, I didn't know either way, so you're completely fine.
This is why we do a podcast. So
this is why we learn things, stuff. Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of Rewind. We can casually figure this out on the fly. We don't have to know
Kate,
it all.
Kate, that's a freaky story. And especially because if it is a Memorex-style rock thing, was there an instance where her mother was screaming her name in pain?
Yeah,
because this doesn't sound like that ever happened before, So I don't like that. This seems like some weird intelligence behind it that was fun with her. So no, thank you.
Fun
I say
stuff.
no, thank you, sir.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. A lot of us listening tonight would drop everything to help someone we care about. We'll go out of our way for others. But how often do we give ourselves that same treatment? This month, BetterHelp Online Therapy wants to remind you that you matter. And therapy is a great way to make sure you show up for yourself. I can personally say that therapy gave me the valuable tools needed to help me deal with difficult emotions in a healthier, more constructive way, rather than pushing them down only to find them boiling over at a later date. And I really believe that therapy can help you too, no matter what you may be struggling with. Now, BetterHelp is online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist. So you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Give it a try and see why over 2 million people have used BetterHelp Online Therapy. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Monsters Among Us listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/Monsters Among Us. That's BetterHelp.com/Monsters Among Us for 10% off your first month. Now, as always, supporting our sponsors supports the show. So thank you for listening. Now back to the Unlocked episode.
Well, you know what? Before we move on, why don't you go ahead and tell us that story that you teased a little bit? I happen to know the story because I've heard you say it on the show, but I think my listeners are really going to enjoy this.
I'm sorry, I apologize if you've heard this one before. I've talked about it a couple times, but it is a weird one. Long story short, I will preface this by saying I had just been out to Roswell for the first time a couple weeks before. And oddly enough, this incident happened around the Roswell anniversary. This was June 29th of 2016.
Okay.
And it was around 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up. So at the time I had a bulldog named Albie, who was the best. Mm. And Albie would alternate between sleeping in his bed in my bedroom and then going out to the couch and sleeping out on the couch. And in my living room, we're on the ground floor, and the couch is near the window that looks out onto the pathway that runs alongside of the building. So that's all you really need to know. I guess also there's like there's a little rock garden out front with little spotlights that beam up towards my window. So if anything was standing between those spotlights and my window and my closed drapes, it would project a silhouette or shadow onto it, like a shadow puppet. So I woke up to hearing my dog growling lowly from the living room.
Not a good start.
Not a good start. And I also have another dog, a terrier, that was sleeping in bed with me. And my first thought was like, oh, I knew that my neighbor Kyle was working nights on a film shoot, and so I figured he was coming home. But Albie knows him and doesn't growl, so my only thought was like, oh, he's going to start barking, and then Violet will start barking, and they're going to wake everybody up, and I didn't want that to happen. But I was slowly coming to waking up and hearing him. I sat and listened to him growl for a good 10, 20 seconds until I started to feel it escalate, and then he suddenly leapt into woo, 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 like intruder bark.
Oh, no.
My terrier jumps off the bed. She runs out, starts barking her high-pitched guard dog bark. And I'm just rushing out there to shush everybody up. And I come out of the back, and I look up, and at the window, I immediately see a silhouette of a figure. And my first thought is, oh, someone is peering into my window to break into the apartment. And then I see that the silhouette doesn't look like a human silhouette. It looks like a classic alien gray silhouette. It's like that inverted spoon-shaped head and a thin neck. Now, the windowsill, where the windowsill, it's about 3.5 feet off the ground. So this thing, all I could see was head and neck, very thin, very big head, and it would have been about 4.5 feet off the ground. So again, classic alien gray,
perfect size,
style size. Now, I'm somebody that's always been freaked out by alien grays. I've always been scared that they were going to come abduct me, and then but I've always been like, nah, that's just anxiety and that's irrational.
That's Robert Stack, honestly. I think he did that to me too. So
personally responsible for this.
100%.
Thank you, Robert Stack. Thank you, Sightings. I hate all of you.
Tim White, thank that guy as well.
So it was funny. Now, all of this is happening in the matter of seconds, right? But I thought, as the dogs, and my dogs are seeing this, they are looking directly at this being or this figure at the window and going apeshit. And my first thought was, okay, somebody's breaking in. My second thought was, whoa, that looks like an alien. And as soon as I thought that, the figure at the window turned its head, kind of cocked its head, as if they were suddenly aware that I was there. And I could see it undulate, and I could see where the neck fused at the back of the skull. And it looked like a golf club. It was that. It was like not as long of a head as E.T. Still, again, classic gray short, but I was like, oh, this is weird. It undulated. It, like, moved in a very Jim Henson-y kind of puppet way. And then when it moved, you hear, like, stories of, like, why didn't you get a camera? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And I'm standing 30 feet away. I don't have my glasses on, but I think if I did, my vision is good enough that I could make out the figure. And I think if I did have my glasses on, my windows, my drapes that were drawn are sheer enough, I probably could have seen through and gotten a little bit more detail there.
Would you have wanted to, I guess, is the question.
I don't know. Well, looking back, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it undulated, it turned its head, and that's when I went, oh, shit. And I turned on my light in the hallway, and this thing just took off running towards the back of the apartment. Now, dogs are losing their minds. I quickly grab my glasses. I'm shushing them down. I go out on my porch and look in the direction where this thing ran off, and I don't see anything. I look over to my right, and my neighbor comes out on his porch, the guy that I thought was coming home around this time. He's like, what's going on? And I didn't want to say what I thought I saw. I just said there was somebody peering in my window. And he's like, dude, you are freaking me out so much right now. And I was like, why? And he goes, because I got home about an hour ago. I've been winding down. I've been watching Netflix in my bedroom. And I kept taking my headphones off and looking around because I could have sworn there was something in my apartment watching me.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay. So we did a sweep of the perimeter and could not find anything. And if a human had been back there, we would have heard and seen somebody get up and run. We have a little back alley that they could have gone down. But nothing.
That's wild.
So I go, hey, will you humor me? Will you come stand right here? And he's like, sure. And I was like, can you just like bend down and look in my window? So I went back in. I stood where I was standing. I looked at it with my glasses on and my glasses off. And the figure of Kyle, who was like a 5'8", 5'9" man, bending over looking at it, looked nothing like the silhouette of what I saw. Like, you could see shoulders. You could tell that somebody was hunched down. I was like, nope, this is not what I saw. I saw thin neck, big head. And if my dogs hadn't seen it and been the ones to alert me to it, I would have thought I had hallucinated the entire thing. It was wild, and I have to, like, take into account, okay, I didn't get a clear image of this, so maybe it was something that, that just looked like an alien. But I'm telling you, this looked like on the nose cliche Steven Spielberg Close Encounters alien. Like, it looked like it was the same shape as the figure that stands outside the craft at the end of Close Encounters and like raises its hands up towards the craft. I can
picture it right now. Yeah,
it was all. And this is the other thought that I had, like, in the moment, and at the time I was like, that was almost too cliche. You know what I mean? Like, the clichéness of it made me go, well, that couldn't have been that, because that was so on the nose. Yeah,
And it's a gray alien. I mean, if you really think about the description you just gave, what else could it possibly be? I suppose that's somebody with a deformity, possibly, but
that is the closest thing in our vocabulary that I can point to and say that's what this looked like. Yeah. Now, no other phenomenon, no light phenomenon, no strange dreams that night, no sense of missing time. No UFO eyewitness stuff happened. I checked around for stuff the next day. No reports of any of that stuff. I don't know what this was. I will not go, it was for sure an alien gray that came out of a spaceship. I will say that's the closest thing that I have to describe it. My gut kept telling me that I caught wind, that I saw something, and actually I only saw it because my dog saw it first. I got a real sense that this was something that was more akin to like a leprechaun or a gnome or an elf. It's almost like I got the Jacques Vallée vibe from it, that this was some sort of elemental or interdimensional thing that exists here, that has the ability to cross over and pass through, and I was not supposed to see it.
Yeah.
It made me feel like I felt more like the character in a story who catches a leprechaun sitting on a toadstool than I did a person seeing an alien out of a spaceship. And that's just what my gut told me. It was almost like I caught a raccoon in the wild, but this is more rare than your typical woodland creature.
Sure.
And I don't know if that means that it is sort of some sort of elemental that's based here, some spirit entity. Again, I've told you I feel like these hills are weird and haunted. So, but I almost had that sense more than it was something out of a spacecraft. But it looked like a gray. So I don't know. You know what I mean? And
it's a crazy story.
And I have to consider myself an unreliable witness in the story as well. It's frustrating, as I think a lot of these eyewitness stories are.
Yeah.
Because there are boxes there that I couldn't check. But I'll tell you, the thing that I keep going back to is like my dog saw it first. My dog saw it. And had they not alerted me to it, this thing would have just walked by, and I never, ever, ever would have seen it.
Yeah. Well, there's something different about you just telling the story of you seeing something strange, and then you telling the story where I saw something strange, and both of my dogs saw the same thing and reacted to it. That gives you all sorts of credence.
And my neighbor being like, I felt like something
yeah.
was watching me. It's just weird, you know. It was a weird situation, weird thing that I can't explain. That's it. You know what I mean? I cannot explain it.
Ironically, I have a story that falls in line with this pretty well. This took place in the 60s. I don't have the exact date here, but we'll find out here very shortly. This episode originally aired in Season 7, Episode 19. And again, this is Anne from California.
Hi, my name is Anne, and this is my mom's story. It happened in Los Angeles, California in 1960, 1961. I was just a baby, but my mom has always told this story, and it's always the same. Anyway, my parents had immigrated from Europe in like 1957, so my mom was a homemaker with 2 little kids at the time. She didn't speak very much English, and she certainly didn't read or write any English. We lived on a property that was pretty large. It was about an acre, and it was in the shape of a rectangle. There was a house in the front where my aunt lived, and we lived in the house towards the back of the lot. So anyway, so she was doing laundry, and we didn't have a clothes dryer, so she would always take the clothes out and hang them out on the line. The clothes line was not like the ones they have today where they're like in a circle. This is old school, so it was like 2 metal T's, and then the line was strung between the 2 metal T's. So anyways, she was taking the clothes out onto the porch, and it was a sunny morning, nothing unusual. So she stepped out, and she had her basket of wet laundry in her hands, and the house was kind of elevated, so she had to go down these steps. And so as she's carrying the basket, she's looking down at the steps so she doesn't fall. And then once she hits the ground, she starts walking towards the clothesline. And as she's walking, she's looking at the clothesline, and she suddenly stops because she sees standing underneath the clothesline is this little silver man. And she said she just stopped and was completely frozen with fear. And so she's looking at him, and he starts motioning for her to come. And she says that she hears in her head that he wants her to come. So she said she dropped the basket, and she turned to run back in the house. And she said the next thing that she remembers is that she's in the kitchen, and it's not the morning anymore. And that's all that she remembers. She doesn't remember anything else. So shortly after that, we moved to a suburb of L.A., and now it's like the 1960s, you know, UFO talk is everywhere. And so I'm telling my friends, you know, the subject comes up, so I tell my friends about the story. And when my mom finds out about it, she's like not happy, and she tells me, don't tell anyone about this story. And I said, well, why not? Isn't it true? And she said, yeah, it's true, but no one's going to believe you, and I don't want people to think that I'm crazy, so don't tell anybody the story anymore. So I didn't. But then later on as an adult, you know, I've always been interested in UFOs and hauntings and all that stuff. So I asked her about the story because as I'm reading all of these different tales about UFOs and such, I always thought when she told me about the little silver man, I always pictured the silver man being like an astronaut with his silver suit on. But she said, no, that's not what he looks like. And when she described him again to me, I realized what she was describing was what I would think would be a gray alien. Yeah, it's a really strange story. But that's it. And just wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed the podcast, and I think you're doing a great job. And I have other stories to tell, so I may be calling back. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you, Anne, for sharing that with us. Michael, this is pretty similar to what you're describing, right? I mean, a similar build to the creature, same location.
Yeah.
Do you see any other similarities here that ring a bell to you?
I mean, the thing I like that her mom describes this as a little silver man, mm-hmm. and I think it's noteworthy that this happened before the term alien gray was in the lexicon.
Yeah.
And in some of these early alien gray stories, you heard about them wearing silver jumpsuits. So I think this all tracks for the time and place. Again, no UFO involved. Mm-hmm. No bright lights, just the appearance of the figure. Feels like again a story that could be in line with the Fae, or the fairy folk or the Hilder folk, where something appears kind of out of nowhere and beckons somebody to come with them. Yeah, weird stuff. I love this story. This is the kind of thing that I am into, like
the history of it. Yeah,
and just mom, like a person who's not expecting something like this to happening, and that's just where I was when I had my experience, middle of the night, not thinking about aliens, not even doing a podcast yet about aliens. You know what I mean? Had been to Roswell, which I think is weird. I almost felt like something followed me back, or the intelligence was like, "Hey, are you into this? Here we are. Yeah. Hi." Kind of like looking back. I don't know. I love this story, and I think it's a very human response to be like, don't tell anybody this. No one is going to believe you, and I don't want them to think your mom's crazy. Like, I understand that fear.
Yeah.
I remember, like, telling my brother-in-law, was the first person I told that story to, and I've heard this happening in other eyewitness stories. Like, I had almost like a hard time getting the words out of my mouth.
You get that a lot, actually, yeah.
Where I was like, I was, and he was like, take your time, take a breath. What happened? And he's a super skeptical guy, and he was really non-judgmental about it, which I appreciated.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Because I was shaking, man. I mean, I was running full of adrenaline. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, and it was just like, when you see something that breaks your brain like that, it's a good thing she didn't go with it. That's all I'll say. I think it was smart.
Yeah.
Smart choice.
Sounds like she did against her will anyway. There was a big chunk of missing time involved. So
right. Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Broad daylight also intrigues me. Any stories where like these entities, these like small entities, just appear in broad daylight always fascinates me.
I've got another one for you, Michael, and I just found this one this morning. So I actually saw this morning on a friend of the show, Rob Christofferson's Instagram, and I thought this really tied in really well with what we got going on here. So listen to this story.
Ronnie Hill is the last person anyone would suspect of capturing an alien on film. At the time of the Little Man of North Carolina incident, Ronnie was 13 years old, the president of his class, president of the local 4-H club, and the assistant patrol leader of his Boy Scout group. On July 21st, 1967, Ronnie was working in his family's garden behind their home. The first thing he noticed was an odor reminiscent of gas. It caused his eyes to water. There was an unusual silence that had crept into the area. 15 minutes later, the silence was replaced with a buzzing sound. The smell of the gas increased. Turning his head, he caught the shape of a blacktop hat-shaped object. There was another object, a white ball-like object 9 feet in diameter. Convinced that no one would believe him, he ran inside and grabbed his Kodak Sabi 620 camera. Returning outside, the object had landed on the ground. A loud sound hurt his ears, and that's when Ronnie saw a short figure emerge from behind the craft. They were between 3.5 and 4 feet tall, carrying a funnel-like device that they positioned toward the ground. Ronnie was 15 feet away from the man and the object when he took the photo. He could hear hissing sounds during this time, though he wasn't sure if it was the being or the craft. The being, once again, moved beyond the craft, walking with a wobbling gait. The craft took off slowly, the black hat reappearing. The white object joined a larger craft, taken inside by a rod. The being had puffy cheeks and high cheekbones. Their eyes were tilting and slanted. They wore a skin-tight metallic suit, a blue belt, and a silver helmet.
No, this actually has the photograph that this young man captured, and I sent it over to you. Yeah, you got it right there. Does that look like what you saw, if you had to guess? I mean, to describe this really quick, you can check it out in the show notes, but it's just It looks like a 2-3 foot tall humanoid shape. It almost looks like a feminine build, if you had to give it a guess. A large head that appears to have a helmet or something on its head, and it's all very reflective. It seems to be like the metallic color that's described. Does this look like what you saw?
Look, similar stature, but no. I mean, I saw that, judging from the photograph, the head... So the head on this, like, first of all, this photograph is really intriguing, really fascinating, and to me, sounds like maybe what the last listener's mom saw, because this guy is, like, definitely silver. But you can see there's almost like Mayor McCheese, like, facial features on this thing. The thing I saw was a classic smooth, no puffy cheeks, no helmet. It was like that, again, it looked like an inverted spoon, like the pointy chin,
that classic
again,
look.
Classic cliche alien gray, like it looks like the decal.
Yeah.
With a stick neck underneath it. This looks like this brings to mind entities that come up in a lot of stuff in like the John Keel stories in the 60s and 70s, like really strange UFO not stories. This reminds me of the Socorro saucer story.
Oh, yeah.
From the 60s.
New Mexico.
Yeah, Lonnie Zamora in is it New Mexico or Arizona? I can't remember.
I thought it was New Mexico, but maybe you might be right. It might be Arizona.
And I might be right. Let's for the sake of it, shits and giggles.
We do have the ability to figure this out.
Yeah.
I remember the thing that sticks out to me about that case is the tripod marks.
Yeah, it's New Mexico.
Where this craft landed and kind of blasted rocks away. So it looks like little campfires in this tripod shape.
This is a really weird photo, and I love it because you've got the craft allegedly and the entity allegedly. This just reminds me of some of those like kookier, weirder alien story,
Yeah, from the 60s and 70s. I mean, that was like the
70s.
golden era of this kind of thing.
Yeah, this is like a real high strangeness alien.
Mm-hmm.
Probably height-wise and stature-wise, similar to what I saw, but this is different. This is not the same silhouette, no. But wild. This is really, really wild. I really hope this photograph is real. It looks real, but it is like looking at almost like an illustration. Part of it, like your brain wants to go, well, this is like a fairy tale creature because it does look so strange.
It's also kind of like a Rorschach test, too, where you can make all sorts of things out of this photograph. It's not detailed enough that you think you see a face or you think you see like features in this body, but you don't know for sure that those are actually there if it's just pareidolia just filling in the blanks.
Yeah. This is weird, dude. I love it. I don't know if this is a guy who set up a puppet and a egg craft, but it's weird. The egg craft thing was really like a 60s and 70s thing. I mean, so much so that like it became the shape of Mork's ship on Mork and Mindy.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
He flew in on an egg. It's weird that we don't have as many flying egg stories as we did. So who knows what this is about? But this is the kind of stuff I love. These weird, almost sci-fi B-movie creatures. Something that could look like would come out of like early Star Wars aliens. I love this, or Star Trek. Like, give me this stuff. Like, all day long.
This almost looks like Lost in Space, honestly. If you were to pin it down to a particular program, I would say that.
Yeah, that or Doctor Who,
Yeah.
something strange. So, I don't know, dude. This is wild.
Fun
love
stuff.
it. Love that story, and I love this photo.
And how weird is it that I read that this morning, I think, and I'd already sent these calls out to you and said, these are what we're going to cover. And I saw that. I'm like, man, it's almost identical. The story's almost identical to what Ann told. So I had to share that. I had to put that on the show. So
I agree. Yeah, that's a great visual aid. You got to post that with this episode.
Well, Michael, we're running a little bit late on this, so I'm going to give you a choice between two calls here. Have you heard of the Glimmer Man?
I hadn't. I want to talk about this because I did listen to this call.
Let's talk about the Glimmer Man a bit.
Great.
Before we do that, let's play Eric's call from California. And this originally aired on Season 10, Episode 1. And this is Eric's story.
Hi, Derek. This is Eric from California. I wanted to call in. I've done that before, and thank you for posting those episodes. I was reminded of maybe a Glimmerman experience when I was a kid outside of Atlanta, Georgia. I lived in like Dunwoody, Roswell area in a apartment, or actually it wasn't an apartment complex yet. We would move there because of this incident. It actually really scared my mom. We were in townhouses, and the second line of townhouses, let's say our street made a square. So we were the right angle, we were the y-axis, they were the x-axis. And behind their house was a wooded area, and that wooded area was immediately sloping down. It was a hill. I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. I had a big wheel, and my neighbor who lived 2 doors down was a little bit younger than me, but he was cognizant and smart, and so I'd play with him and kind of just, it was a neighborhood kid, a neighborhood friend. So we were racing our big wheels, and we ran behind the x-axis track of townhouses. Well, he sped before me because I slowed down. And to my left is a big fence lining the backyard of these, quarter, eighth, 16th acre properties of townhouses. And then to the right are the woods. Well, out of the woods, something compelled me to stop. And it wasn't like, I decided it, I agreed with it, but it was like, I just had to stop. It was as if something was in front of me. And in my memory, nothing's there. I can see the woods and I can see myself. I remember stopping on my big wheel. Well, then I'm lifted off the ground. And my mom always told me, she taught me how if somebody stops and asks you, if you want some candy or to see their puppies, you run the opposite way. You run backwards because it's harder for them to drive in reverse. That's how you get away. I wanted to do that. I couldn't because I was 5 feet off the ground. I was being lifted out of the air, and I still to this day can feel hands grabbing me. Something like hands. I think hands were just the only thing I could and I can compare it to. In any case, while I was up in the air being held up by this invisible being or figure, because something was there, like I felt it and I knew it was there. It was very cognizant, but it wasn't visual. I could see my friend who had beaten me in the race looking back, and the look of terror and horror on his face. It was something I can't etch out of my mind. The look of shock, how wide his eyes were. So I know that I'm not alone in this experience. I know you've mentioned some Glimmerman stuff, and I didn't know what it was called. But when I described it to the police officer, because once it set me back down slowly, and then I just sped off, and we ended up finishing our race, sure, but we weren't finishing our race. We were running for our lives. And then we ran into our separate houses, and I told my mother someone just picked me up, and in my memory I black out. But I come to, and I'm talking to a police officer, and she asked me to describe him, what he looked like, and I said he had dreadlocks. I don't know why I said that, but when you mentioned that these people have these Glimmerman experiences with people with dreadlocks, not people, these invisible beings that look like Predator, it kind of all made sense. So maybe I'm really lucky. Who knows? I really appreciate the show. I'm going to continue binge listening, but I just wanted to call in and contribute to this chaos you have going. Now, thank you so much, Derek.
And thank you, Eric, for sharing that. Okay, Michael, you said you had heard of the Glimmerman, or is this a new phenomenon for you?
I've heard of, I don't think I've heard of the Glimmerman specifically. Definitely heard of, obviously shadow people, and then, static entities that show up in the night that look like they're made out of static from the old TV sets. And then the closest I think to the Glimmerman I've heard of, and you'll explain this more, is the stories, again, back to John Keel, of the grinning man entities that people would see. Sometimes Indrid Cold gets lumps in with that, but there was, leading up to that, there were incidents of I think there was like a guy in New Jersey that a bunch of kids saw standing behind a fence that was wearing like a shiny green and yellow suit, like a shimmering suit, and was smiling at them creepily. So I hadn't heard of any. Yeah, so I hadn't heard anything specifically like this. So tell me what you're talking about.
Sure. Well, these contemporary Glimmerman sightings, I'm talking like late 90s up until today, they're essentially the Predator from the Predator franchise. They're that technology-based camouflage, whatever it is that they've managed to do. I've received tons of reports from the state of Idaho, oddly enough. I mean, I'd say 50% of the calls I've received, and I've probably got 20 calls based on this. And like I said, half of them are from Idaho, weirdly enough. And then other places like Ohio, this one's California. I'm trying to think of a few other places where I've had them reported. But essentially, they're just a humanoid figure, looks like a normal build man, but they're camouflaged. And
the wave is bending around them.
It's just light is bending around them or something like that. And there is some military technology that kind of gives this effect. But from my understanding, and of course, they're not going to tell us if it is, but my understanding is it's not quite ready. Like, they're not actually testing this out.
Right.
But the people that run into these things, it's almost as if they were given the suit and said, here, go practice. Go out and scare some people. Because the little girl was in a rest area bathroom and doing her business, and all of a sudden the corner started moving, and there was a person there in the corner.
Well, that's not okay.
That's not okay to begin with, but that's creepy as hell. There was another one that I remember from... it was from Missing 411 documentary, The Hunted, I believe, was that one, where a deer hunter in Ohio was actually in a deer stand, and she said this creature walked by while she was up in the deer stand, and she could see it clear as day. And they're all describing it essentially like the Predator from those films.
Well, and I've heard, obviously, and especially doing the show with Bryce, like, this comes up in the Bigfoot stuff all the time, that Bigfoot has some sort of ability to cloak.
Yeah.
And look, I think, like, that's possible. It might be some tech. I also think, like, look, our eyeballs can only see a limited range of the visual spectrum. You know, anybody who has a pet, you know that, like, your pet can see some things, like cats can see some things you can't, and you can see some things that your cat can't. I can see some things, you know, like, my dogs can't register what's on the TV screen unless it's a really large image that's up close, right? The the screen's on, right? So I just think that it's possible that there are naturally recurring entities, or some of these entities just don't fully register on our visual wavelength. You know what I mean? That, like, we're not able to see them completely, that they're coming through blurry. You know what I mean? And even our cameras aren't catching them. You know, that it looks blurry because we can't see the full, you know, resolution of their bodies. You know what I mean? So that's weird. It is weird that it's so Predator specific, and, like, the idea of, like, it had dreadlocks.
Yeah, this report is the only one I have that I've ever heard of the dreadlocks. And
so I wonder. So that makes me think. Okay, one of two things. One, that the storyteller, the experiencer here, as a kid, connected the glimmering effect to Predator, which he had already seen. And so his best way at 4 or 5, and maybe, you know, it's a young age to see it, but if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you saw a lot of stuff that, you know, was like, probably shouldn't have. But
I definitely watched Predator when I was 5 or 6.
Too young.
Whenever it came out.
Too young. So I could see a kid going, the best way I can describe it is dreadlocks, because you're associating the glimmering with the Predator that has dreadlocks.
That's exactly what I was thinking too, yeah.
So even if you didn't specifically see dreadlocks, you're thinking about the dreadlock man from the Predator movie. So that's possible. It's a kid's interpretation of it. Also weird that, like, is this like some weird tulpa thing? Are we bringing... Is our collective consciousness bringing the Predator, who's now become so firm in our cultural landscape and zeitgeist, is it sort of bleeding over into reality in some way?
That's
like,
an interesting concept, yeah.
I don't know, you know, and I don't know where I stand on that stuff, but it's like, the fact it picked him up, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's really, really weird.
Well,
really weird.
Another weird thing happened. this morning, or yesterday actually, I was listening to a friends of mine, Expanded Perspective, Cam and Kyle down in Texas. They have their own paranormal podcast, and they kind of coined the term Glimmerman. I think they actually came up with that term. Before that, we didn't really have a name for it. And they were telling a story on this particular episode that I have to share with you as well.
I'm talking about the Glimmerman. I believe I've encountered this being in my childhood. This is a very vivid memory I've had my entire life. I grew up in Somerset, California, in an unincorporated part of El Dorado County. We lived on 5 acres. I was around 6, running around outside. I was in the front of my house by a dilapidated shed that was on the property. All of a sudden, everything went silent. I couldn't hear anything. It felt like I was deaf. No birds or anything. Not even the rustle of long dead grass in the wind. It was completely silent. I thought it was strange. Suddenly, I look about 30 feet in front of me and see something making a beeline towards me, though I couldn't see anything. All I could see was the disturbance of dead oak leaves on the ground being blown towards me. I then, whatever this was, felt it pick me up, and it held me against the shed in the air. I was then dropped like nothing happened, and it seemed to vanish. I ran inside crying to my mom. That house had many paranormal encounters while we were there, from shadow men to orbs. Thanks for listening to my story. You guys rock. Garrett.
So there we have the same state, very similar stories. A young man outside playing, picked up by this seemingly invisible entity. What do you make of these two coincidences? Is it a coincidence? Is this maybe telling of something that might have been going on in the 80s?
I mean, you can't rule it out, right? You have some corroborating, eyewitness testimony that backs up. I mean, it certainly would make that the listener from the other story feel less crazy, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah.
Comforting to know that, like, okay. This also reminds me of the Carl Higdon alien abduction, where Carl Higdon was a elk hunter.
Yeah, the Wyoming encounter.
Yeah, and he talks about how the forest went completely silent and everything went still, and it felt like all of nature had paused right before he encountered this weird alien with the drill bit hand that had offered him little a cellophane packet of pills and took him on his cube-shaped spaceship to another planet. So there's that idea of everything kind of stopping and pausing, whether that means that something's interfering, you're crossing over into a liminal space. That tracks. Yeah, weird
it's
stuff.
Wild. Yeah.
I don't know what any of this stuff is. You know what I mean? I just don't. I love the stories. I love it.
Yeah. You want to hear something even weirder?
Yeah.
So the film The Predator, there's a guy that created this look for the monster.
Stan Winston, right?
Stan Winston, yeah, his company worked on it, but I think the guy that actually came up with this design, his father was J. Allen Hynek.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
How wild is that?
That's cool. That's never come up on our show before.
I don't have his name off the top of my head, but if you IMDb him, he's on there. Something Hynek. His last name's Hynek, whatever it is, but he's actually his son. So that, and for those that don't know, Hynek ran Project Blue Book in the 60s, and I think it ran almost to the 70s, 69 or something like that, right? So he was probably privy to all sorts of crazy things. Did he tell his son, there's this technology out there that we're encountering? Right. And the son's like, I have a great idea for a monster.
Well, and I remember the original monster, and that was played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, and had a much different look. It was more buggy and weird looking. And they were like,
Aardvark or something.
We gotta throw this out and redo it. Thank God. That's wild. What a cool coincidence. Yeah. I love that. And of course, even if his dad didn't, you would have to think that someone who's that creative, who grows up, people conspiracy theorists are like, Hollywood knows all the secrets, and they're working with the government to to disclose and do this, or Spielberg was shown this or that, and it's look, maybe Spielberg was shown some weird stuff. For Close Encounters, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think so. Let me tell you, as someone who works and lives in Hollywood, nobody truly knows what they're doing out here. They're just
100% agree with that.
They're trying to chase success, but creative people with imaginations gravitate towards Hollywood. They also gravitate towards this stuff. So I don't think Hollywood's being told a lot of the stuff. It's just a lot of people in Hollywood are into this shit like I am and are well researched, and then they put it into their scripts because it captures their imagination. So I could absolutely see this guy being influenced by his father's work or researching what his father did, coming across stories of cloaking aliens and being like, here we go, this has got to be part of this movie. That tracks to me. I don't think anyone's really, working closely to disclose alien,
Yeah, I don't think so either. I've worked with the military. I've worked for Boeing. I had clearance for a little while, and I've actually worked in films for a good 10 years. And I can tell you neither set of people know what they're doing, honestly. And they're certainly not communicating with one another.
No, guys, here's the thing. Nobody knows what they're doing. All of this is chaos.
Exactly.
It's all like
100%.
It's all
chaos.
hit or miss. It's all hit or miss, yeah. Oh, weird, cool stuff, man. I love all this. I love that photo. I'm going to be thinking about that picture for a long time. I got to look into that story. We might need to cover that on Bigfoot Collectors.
Oh, that'd be great. So I got one more story for you, and I'm calling a bit of an audible here. I didn't send you this one on purpose because I want to see your reaction as you listen to this.
Great.
Now, this is a story I shared with, I think, everybody I've had on one of these Rewind episodes. And it's got to be my favorite Bigfoot call. And you guys are Bigfoot Collectors Club, so we definitely have to round this thing out with a Bigfoot call. So this final call is a little bit lengthier, but it's going to be worth it, trust me. Now, this is Mac from Mississippi, and all you longtime listeners know exactly what this call is.
Hey, Derek. This is Mac from Mississippi. I was just listening to a podcast and heard that my story didn't come through. It's too staticky, so I figured I'd record it and email it to you. That way the quality would be a little bit better than trying to be on a recorded phone line. Like I said, I was out deer hunting. I was in a climbing stand, and I climbed about 30 foot up, and I was sitting there. I lost my balance, and footing got out from underneath me, and I fell. Didn't have a safety harness on or anything like that. I should have, and I do from this point on. But I fell, and shoot, I was 30 foot up in a tree, so. What was that? Anyway, I fell and hit the bottom rung limbs. I was in a big oak tree. When I hit the bottom limbs, it's probably 8 to 10 foot off the ground when I hit, and they kind of caught me. But I later found out that I had broken my back and I couldn't move. But when I hit, I passed out. I blacked out. And I wear glasses, and my glasses fell off. My gun went somewhere. I later found it. But at the time, it just fell. Didn't have it with me. Wasn't tied to anything. It just fell. So I get awoken off the tree with agonizing pain. And I'm being, like I said, I'm 8 to 10 foot off the ground laying on these trees. And I'm 5'10", 320. 325. I'm not a little guy. But I was being lifted off these limbs and supported underneath my neck and on my rear end by just these gigantic hands. And my glasses fell off, and without those, man, I am blind. I can't see a piece of paper 3 foot from me. I can't see unless it's right up on me. So my glasses fell off, and what happened next is still troubling. I was lowered to the ground by this creature. I guess you're going to call it a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever your deal on that is. And it was a female, and I say it was a female because the first thing it had a feminine looking face. If that makes sense, it wasn't. I hear a lot of people on these podcasts talk about it looked like a big silverback gorilla and all that. This wasn't that. It was ape-like, but like the cheekbones and the face was more slender than you would look like. I'd say if I looked at gorillas online or in the zoo or pictures, the big old wide face and all that. It was more of a contoured face, and she was also had breasts, and the breasts were She was lactating. And I'm sitting there in agony, man, and I'm scared to death. I don't know what is going on. And she takes her breast and puts it in my mouth, and she tries to get me to drink milk from her breast. And she squeezes her breast, and a little bit of milk gets in my mouth, and it is disgusting. I'm talking about it is the nastiest thing I've ever tasted. But she, during this time, is being so nurturing. It reminded me, now looking back on it, looking at videos of Coco the gorilla with her kittens, how she would nudge them and love on them and try to get them close to her. And she could, generally to care that she generally could tell that she cared. That's what this gorilla, she was, she was worried about me. And it's really weird. While all that was going on, man, I'm panicking, but I can't move. I got taken to the hospital later after I was found. After I didn't come home, they came out looking for me, and I had a broken back. But as she was doing that, back behind her, there was something much, much larger than she was. And we have wild boars here in the South, in Mississippi. I live in central Mississippi, right on the Alabama line. And we have wild pig here that they're pretty big. They can get 260, 300 pounds for a wild boar. They can do a lot of damage. But what was behind her, I never saw the full vision of it because I couldn't see that far. But the sound that it made, it was like it was communicating with her, but it was so deep and so guttural. And it's just like it went through my chest and went all into my body, and it was pulsating. And man, when I heard that, I knew that I was either something was coming to kill me. I was done for. But she turned around and she would kind of communicate, like do her little noise, and then it just got me. It got really aggressive and light, and then she kind of pushed me away, not really aggressively, but kind of like, okay, I'm through. And then she got up and she left. But man, I'm telling you, whatever that was behind her, I'm glad that it didn't come over there. Man, it just sounded like a beast. I mean, just a beast. And it just shook me to my core whenever it made that noise. I could feel it in my whole body, like it was sitting on my chest. And like I said, few left, and whatever was in the woods with her left too. I'm suspecting that was a male. And then my family come and found me, because I hadn't come home and it was getting dark and things. All this was happening later. When I woke up, whenever I was lifted, it was probably around 5:30, 6. So it was almost dark then, but it was so low lit. And then about, I really don't know time. It was dark and my family came and found me. I'm really not sure what time that was. But I didn't come home, and they knew where I was going hunting at. That's one thing. And all you hunters out there, if you hunt by yourself, if you got the iPhone app or any Android apps that's got any kind of find me, cut that on, or let your family members know where you're going and go where you say you're going. If I would have snuck off somewhere else, I would have laid there probably, no telling what would have happened. If that big thing wouldn't have got me, man, we got coyotes down here and bobcats, and if I couldn't move and I was just laying there helplessly, man, ain't no telling what could happen. And where you harness in the tree, man, that's so important. Number one, I'm not getting back in the tree, but if I do, then, I'm going to have to, you got to wear a harness if you're up there. But that's my story. Appreciate it.
Well.
Wow, yeah, that's wild. I also love the ending is like, the more you know.
Yeah, it's a life lesson too, right?
Yeah, look, I mean, that tracks. It all makes sense. If these creatures are out there, I could totally see them seeing him in distress and the maternal instinct to try to nurse or help someone who she knew was injured, and something that looks so closely similar to them, So I get that. That all makes sense. If we assume, or if we want to make the leap that Bigfoot exists, yeah, wild story, very specific, obviously. The skeptic side of me would say the shock and trauma from that back breaking, that this was a hallucination or a fever dream in the middle of that, and some just real primal stuff kicked up from his subconscious, you know, and when his body was suffering, went to a very primal place of like, I need mom, I need protection, you know, and something just deep within your psyche bubbled up, and that's what you're getting.
Yeah.
You know, maybe the sour taste of the milk is blood in his mouth or something, you know, so I can see that too. I mean, I've had dreams, you know, that are very primal in that way and feel very powerful and almost feel like you're making contact with some ancient old entity. But I certainly wouldn't discount this from being a very physical and real, tangible possibility that, like, two Sasquatch, like, helped him out of that tree. And then, you know, maybe Papa Bigfoot's like, this guy's got a gun. Let's get out of here. We've been watching this guy. Let's leave him here.
Yeah.
You know, we got to go. We got to split in case there are others like him around here that might shoot us, you know?
I really like that explanation you just gave, that perhaps it is some sort of fever dream. I'd never heard anybody mention that before. I certainly never thought of it.
I mean, I'm
grabbing for logical straws here. I mean, that makes the most sense.
If we're just you know, who knows? You know, I'm saying that's the skeptical side of me.
Sure,
I'm not saying I come down one way or another on the either, because I do think that, you know, as he pointed out, like Coco the gorilla, primates will do, you know, we hear stories about like kids falling into the zoo, you know, into the primate, and the mother gorillas will scoop up the baby and protect them. So that tracks with primatology, I think, you know.
And it's almost like human behavior, what's being described
100%.
here, yeah.
Well, if we saw an injured animal in the woods, you know, most of us would try to help. You know, if we found a bird with a broken wing, we'd cradle it and try to figure out how to help it.
And then what else we do? We put a little saucer with some water in there too, right?
Yeah, feed it.
We try to feed
exactly.
that thing. Yeah.
Yeah, like I found a hummingbird outside my building on the sidewalk. I scooped it up. I made some sugar water, and I sat there and nursed it until it flew off. You know, there's that instinct to do that. So that all tracks, you know, and it's a very human, it shows the human side of Bigfoot, you know. I don't know, man. I mean, I don't disbelieve it. Yeah, I'll say that, you know.
Here's one little wrinkle of the story that adds a little bit of credibility, in my opinion. Mac actually called this story in once before, but sometimes when people call my hotline from rural areas, Mississippi obviously being one of those, the connection's just not great, and sometimes I can't play the call. It's just I can make out some of what's being said, but I can't make out of it. So anyway, I got a hold of him, and I said, you know, I'd love it if you resubmitted this story. And not only did he do that, but it's almost word for word. I mean, there's no variation whatsoever between the two stories. So either he has it perfectly rehearsed, or this actually happened to him, in my opinion.
Well, and also, who wants to tell that story? Who wants to make up to be like, I sucked on Bigfoot's breast? Like, nobody wants to like tell that story necessarily. That's why I think whatever happened, it was real to him. Whether it was a hallucination and a fever dream in that moment with his body so injured, or that it was literally what he says it was. I don't think this is a guy who's making up this story. I agree. I believe he had this experience 100%.
It's one of my favorite calls, and as far as Bigfoot goes, it's probably the most wild Bigfoot call that I've ever heard firsthand from somebody.
Also, what was that strange like Bigfoot sound at the beginning of that call?
That's the other thing. I left that in there because in the middle of him talking, you hear that sound. In the original recording, it's much lower, and I actually punched up that audio right there so you can hear that it's some sort of howl. And I live in the mountains here in California, and I deal with coyotes constantly. In fact, right before we started recording, there was a pack literally right outside my window. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. And I was thinking, are they going to ruin this for me? Am I going to have to push this recording?
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with the way they sound, and they don't sound like that. That's a wolf. No. That's a hound dog or something. It's like
that was something weird.
Classic television movie werewolf howl is what that was.
Yeah, sounds like some of the Bigfoot calls I've heard. Vocalizations.
Creepy
Crazy stuff. Great story, Derek. That was awesome. All great stories. Thank you for sharing those with me.
Well, speaking of which, I appreciate you being here and taking the time to sit down and talk with me and talk shop on some of these. I love getting other opinions on these calls. I hear them week in and week out. throw my opinions out there, but I'd love to hear what other people have to think. So thank you so much for being here and sharing all your wisdom with us. And if you don't mind, tell people where we can find you, where we can find BCC and everything else.
Follow us at Bigfoot Collectors Club on Instagram. We do a lot of posting about our about the show over there. You can subscribe to the podcast itself, Bigfoot Collectors Club, wherever you're listening to this. We also have a Patreon, Bigfoot Collectors Club The Other Side, which is just the parallel dimension to the show. We expand further into some of this stuff and watch, movies and shows and documentaries and talk about that stuff. We also have guests on there occasionally, so it's just more... It's kind of the deeper... We get a little deeper on the other side.
Nice.
So if you're a fan of the show and you want to support us, check out the Patreon. You won't regret it. We get 3 to 5 bonus episodes out every month. We do some video shows and stuff like that. So yeah, check us out there. And we're on Twitter at Bigfoot Pod, but really our social media hub is our Instagram at Bigfoot Collectors Club. And we're going to be doing... I don't know when this comes out, but we will be doing a live feed recording from the virtual clubhouse on September 15th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, Wednesday, September 15th, on the platform Ludo. So we'll have information on how to get tickets to that on our Instagram and the link tree in our bio as well. So if you're around, if this comes out and you want to come watch us do the show live in the moment, unedited, and, I think we're going to have fun doing that. So that's coming up in a few weeks.
That sounds great for the listener and nerve-wracking for the three of you guys.
Yeah, we'll be fine.
I'm sure it'll sound amazing, but I couldn't imagine putting myself through that. But this actually drops either tonight or tomorrow, so you have plenty of time to go check that out. And,
great.
And go check out Bigfoot Collectors Club. And do you have anything on the big screen that we should be looking out for?
Nothing to announce yet. No. So just follow me at Mcmillian on Instagram, and I'll keep you posted when I'm doing fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Michael. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, dude.